We're back, and today we're reviewing a good one. Put simply, Mario vs. Donkey Kong is easily one of the best games I've played this year, hands down. So if you're interested in buying it, you get the go-ahead from me. However, if you're on the fence, or interested in hearing a bit more about why I like it, stick around. It's fun here. This is the cool gaming channel, not one of those bitch-ass virgin ones. As always, time codes and links are down below, and all the support means the world. Without further ado, let's get into it. The original Mario vs. Donkey Kong was released on Game Boy Advance in 2004. The game was a puzzler that took place within the Mario universe and involved Mario chasing down Donkey Kong, who stole a bunch of mini Marios from a factory. Mario travels through worlds solving puzzles to take down Donkey Kong. Upon release, critical response was good, but not great. In their review, Nintendo Insider said, quote, "The game is very repetitive, but for those looking for a solid platform puzzle game for GBA, that may not be a problem," end quote. Many of the reviews for the initial game said the game felt a bit gimmicky and didn't quite do justice to the original Donkey Kong arcade game that clearly inspired it. Despite the mixed critical response, the game did well enough to warrant many follow-ups on future Nintendo consoles. There was March of the Minis, Minis March Again, Miniland Mayhem, Minis on the Move, Tipping Stars, and Mario and Friends Amiibo Challenge. That one was hard not to cringe while saying. But now we have Mario vs. Donkey Kong for the Nintendo Switch, the latest entry in this oft-overlooked Nintendo franchise. This new entry in the series is a remake of that original Game Boy game, and adds 2 new worlds and many challenge levels to boot. It's also lovingly recreated in the new modern Nintendo art style. I have no personal experience with the original GBA game, so this is my first experience with this game. I also bought the game myself with my own money, so I have no bias on either side of this equation. I'm just here to voice my opinion on the game. So let's dive into it. Mario vs. Donkey Kong opens much in the same way that original game did back in 2004. Donkey Kong is stealing a bunch of mini Marios from a toy factory, and Mario chases him down. Mario then follows Donkey Kong through many different worlds with different elements that each offer their own unique spin on the puzzle gameplay experience. Since the game doesn't have a real story per se, I'm going to break this review down into 3 major sections: puzzles, controls, and art and music, in order to make the most sense of the overall package. Let's start with those puzzles. The puzzles in Mario vs. Donkey Kong are excellent. When I bought this game, I really wasn't sure what to expect. The only things I knew about this game was what was shown off at the Nintendo Direct last year. However, after rolling credits, I'm stunned that this game isn't getting more love. Tristan Ogleve at IGN gave the game a 7 out of 10, and honestly, I'm shocked by that. Most of the reviews for this game are in that 7 to 8 range, which I think is a bit low. The reason for that is the puzzles. I think the puzzles in this game are absolutely excellent. In my Mario Wonder review last year, I talked about how I was astounded by the diversity in the level design and gameplay mechanics present in that game. Well, I think the same thing applies here. The puzzle design, progression, and pacing in this game is just an absolute masterclass in how to introduce players to puzzle mechanics that are simple to understand, but hard to master. Each world starts off with the game introducing players to a new mechanic. Some worlds have flowers that can blow items across the level. Some have sharp spikes that make Mario manipulate his environments to pass them. All of these mechanics start off incredibly simple, with the player believing that they can easily manipulate the mechanic and quickly work their way through the world. However, as the world progresses, these mechanics layer on top of each other in ways that you could never anticipate. And then, by the time you reach World 8, each level is a symphony of different mechanics from all throughout the game. Nintendo, over the course of this game, remixes, resets, and reimagines what's possible with the combination of mechanics that they've introduced to the player, which leads to an overwhelming sense of satisfaction upon level completion. At the start of the game, you are given the impression that you are in for an easy time, and I think that's by design in order to not scare off newer or inexperienced players. The first few worlds are quite easy, yet still satisfying. They're pretty to look at and fun to work your way through, but there isn't a ton of depth. The reason for this is because of that pacing I mentioned earlier. The game almost paces itself like a 3-act narrative. The first 3 worlds are easy enough to work your way through. They took me about 2 hours and were pretty enjoyable, but nothing remarkable. Then, in worlds 3 through 6, the challenge progressively goes up with each passing level. New mechanics are introduced, then forgotten about, and then reintroduced in new and fresh ways that really make you use your brain. Finally, the last 2 worlds just feel amped up to the nth degree. Once you're in that final stretch, Nintendo makes you work. For reference, it took me about 8 hours to beat the game, and I would say about 4 of those hours were spent just on the last 2 worlds. They are grueling. But I can't overstate how rewarding it feels when you do finally manage to work your way through that level you've been stuck on for 30 plus minutes. All right. Now that we're a few minutes into this review, I feel I can be honest with you. Let me whisper sweet nothings into your ear, baby. I am not somebody who likes puzzle games. I've tried many times, but I can never get into them. I couldn't vibe with The Witness, Talos Principle, even the puzzles in Uncharted piss me off. I find that the design of puzzle games usually just goes over my head a bit, and I end up just searching up solutions online, which defeats the entire purpose of playing a puzzle game in the first place. I'm glad other people enjoy them, they just usually aren't my thing. And that's why I almost didn't even purchase Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I heard it was a puzzler and my brain instantly checked out. However, since there's a bit of a drought before FF7R, and I would take any possible excuse to not play Skull and Bones, I decided to give it a shot. And I'm so happy I did. The Nintendo design is just absolute magic. I don't know how they do it, but they can take any genre and make a version of it that's incredibly satisfying and fun for both newcomers and veterans alike. And this gives me a chance to dissect that a little bit more. Almost every puzzle from the beginning of the game to the end has some element of it that is easily identifiable by anyone. There are different buttons that Mario jumps on to manipulate the environment, and things are always color-coded to signify what each button controls. This is the most reused mechanic in the game, but what makes the game so good is the way they evolve this core mechanic while maintaining the simplicity that the mechanic initially had. So at the beginning of the game, these buttons will only control 1 or 2 elements per level. It will usually be blocks that appear when you press the button corresponding to its color and disappear when you press another button. But as the game goes on, these buttons begin to control much more. Sometimes it's lasers, sometimes it's flowers that function as propellers, it depends. But the point is, Nintendo takes this easy to understand thing and then evolves it and lets the player figure it out. There are a few hints after the second world, no buddy over your shoulder telling you the solution, just pure faith in their design philosophy. And that faith is justified. Let's do a thought experiment for all my hardcore gamers out there. Ask yourself, how many times did you get stuck on a puzzle that you just couldn't figure out in a AAA game that turned out to have a dumb solution that made you feel like the game was unfair? Now ask yourself, when was the last time that happened in a Nintendo game? The answer to the second question is almost never, at least for me. Sure, some of the shrine puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom are kind of bullshit, but the solution is always obvious once you figure it out. The same applies here, and in almost every other Nintendo game. And I think that's why you see such a strong attachment rate with Switch owners, and why the Switch is the most popular console on the planet despite being the least powerful and least versatile. It's because Nintendo games are well designed. I firmly believe it's that simple. Now to bring it back to Mario vs. Donkey Kong, this simple to understand but hard to master design that Nintendo employs is in full effect here. Whether it's the button mechanic I was talking about or the way in which these mechanics are introduced, every aspect of the design on display here is with the intent of anyone from you to your grandmother being able to understand it easily. Then, once they have you in the door, they force you to exercise your critical thinking to achieve success. I think this is the most understood yet under-discussed aspect of Nintendo games that makes them appeal to almost anyone, and I don't think I fully appreciated the beauty of it until I was the one on the back foot. In most genres, I have that gamer knowledge that we all take for granted. Red barrels blow up, right trigger shoots, A to jump, etc. However, in puzzle games, I don't have that baked-in knowledge. So, for the first time, here I am playing a Nintendo game where I fall into that normie/casual demographic. And I think now I finally understand what makes their design philosophy so magical. It just works. Alright, now that I'm done yapping about the puzzles, let's talk about the controls, which in my opinion are the only real blemish in this whole package. Many Nintendo games don't have the best controls. After all, this is the company that still puts Jump on X in one of their flagship franchises. I'm looking at you! However, here, they're quite frustrating, and often add difficulty to aspects of the game that just feels cheap. There are 2 instances of this that I would like to discuss. The first is the platforming. The platforming in this game is a bit obtuse. Through my 8-hour journey, there were many times where I would go to jump on a platform, and even though Mario's feet were clearly on the platform for a frame or two, I would still miss the jump and end up falling to my death. Many of the platforms in this game are just unclear with their boundaries. I don't know if the game's always been like this, or there's a mismatch between the new assets and the old code, but there were so many times this happened that it was honestly absurd. It's not one of those things that irked me so much I wanted to stop playing, but it just felt cheap. It felt like I had died to something that was completely out of my reasonable control. It made some of the longer platforming levels feel more like a scatterbrained guessing game as opposed to a masterful exertion of skill. I will say this though, the platforming woes made me respect the level design far more. Even if I knew exactly how to beat a level, the pixel perfect nature of the platforming still forced me to take my time with even the most menial of jumps. The second aspect of the controls that were quite annoying were the interactive elements of the levels, particularly ladders and keys. So virtually every level in this game requires Mario to collect a key and transport it to a locked door to get to the next part of the level. I'll say this, a lot of the puzzling revolving around these keys is quite fun. Trying to figure out the pathing that's necessary to get the key to the door is immensely satisfying. What's not satisfying, however, is the way you carry the key. In order to transport the key, Mario must pick it up. However, half the time you try to pick it up, the key will stay exactly where it is. The timing and positioning of Mario must be pixel perfect to actually pick up the key. This is immensely frustrating and made even more infuriating by the fact that once the key has been moved from its initial position, there's a 12-second timer, meaning you must pick up the key within 12 seconds or it will respawn in its starting position. This isn't a huge issue in the earlier worlds because there's usually ample time to make it to the key and pick it up in time, but in the later levels, sometimes you have to transport the key across the entire level without touching it, and by the time you go to retrieve it, there's only 2 or 3 seconds left to pick it up. There were so many frustrating occurrences where I would get to the key with 2 seconds left, but I was just a pixel too far away from it, and the key would reset in its initial position, and I would have to do it all over again. It also led me to disregard solution solution ideas I had in my head that were the correct solution, but I just didn't think I would have enough time to retrieve the key. I know this sounds like a nitpick, but when half of the puzzles in this game revolve around this mechanic, it's incredibly frustrating that it's so finicky. The other annoying aspect of interactivity in this game is the ladders. The ladders in this game are the bane of my existence. This is a nitpick, but I don't fucking care. I'm gonna talk my shit. These ladders are fucking absurd. Just ridiculous. In the last world of the game, there are a lot of moving platform puzzles. I would showcase these here, but I don't want to spoil the later worlds for people on the fence about buying the game. But essentially, you'll be on these moving platforms, and you have to jump onto various ladders from the platforms to traverse the level. The problem comes in when these ladders just don't work at all. There were actually tens, maybe hundreds of times where I died because I was on one of these moving platforms and I went to get on a ladder and just fell to my death. It's actually insane. I've never encountered such a small yet frustrating mechanic in a game. Every time I encountered one of these ladders, it was a sheer guessing game as to whether or not I would actually make it onto said ladder. Also, the later levels in the game are quite long, and sometimes missing a ladder jump would lose you 20 seconds of progress. And with the aggressively timed nature of these levels, that can be the difference between finishing the level within the time limit and not. The last aspect of the game I want to discuss is the art direction and music, which, as with all Nintendo games, are top-notch. Let's start with the music, because I have less to say about that. All I have to say is it's brilliant. It takes many iconic Mario themes you know from various games, but rearranges and recontextualizes them to fit within this world and this type of game. It's a very mellow, sort of off-putting type of feel that adds a lot of charm and diversity to the landscape of music we expect from a Mario game. The highlight of the music, though, is just the way these arrangements work. I played the main theme in the intro to this video, and that's the best example I have. It takes the Mario theme you know, but the arrangement functions in a sort of jazz club call and response manner that gives it such a distinct feel compared to other arrangements of the same piece. Nintendo's music team just so clearly understand how music makes us feel and abuses that knowledge to create tone in a truly remarkable way. The art direction isn't too shabby either. Sure, it's nothing new for Nintendo, and all of it fits within that new Super Mario Bros. Style, but it still looks great. All 8 of the worlds feel distinct and have elements of the art direction that set them apart from all of the others, yet they're still tonally consistent enough to create a cohesive world that all of these elements exist within. I think this is essential as well, given all the new mechanics that get introduced within these worlds and the role the art direction plays in cluing the player into their environment, like with the colored buttons I mentioned earlier. The only downside to the art direction is the background designs. They aren't bad, but they just feel a bit flat compared to recent Nintendo outings like Mario Wonder. I'd imagine this was to try and keep the core spirit of the original GBA game alive and well, but I still think there was definitely areas in which they could have expanded upon the background environment design. Overall, I think Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the Nintendo Switch is a really great game. Does it significantly impact or push the medium forward? No. However, not all games need to or are trying to do that. Mario vs. Donkey Kong does exactly what it set out to do. It takes a cult classic from the GBA and modernizes and improves it in almost every single way. The puzzle design is some of the most intuitive I've ever seen, though granted, I'm someone who doesn't experiment with the genre very often. However, I think that makes the design of the game even more impressive. It's easy to understand, yet challenging to master. This makes the idea of going back in and doing those expert difficulty levels an exciting prospect to me. I now feel comfortable with these puzzle mechanics and want to experiment with them and push myself as far as I can go. And I never thought I'd feel that way about a puzzler. In my Super Mario RPG review back in November, I said that despite the fresh coat of paint, the game still felt like a product of a different era, and that I felt as though more energy should have been poured into tightening up the antiquated combat systems present in that game. I feel the opposite about Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I feel like with this game, Nintendo put their energy into modernizing the correct aspects of this game, and with the exception of some frustrating interactivity in the environments, this endeavor proved to be a rousing success. The more I think about this game, the more I realize that I truly loved the 8 hours I spent with it. They're definitely some of the best 8 hours I've had playing a game this year. And at a $50 price point, it's really hard to argue with the value proposition here. I think almost anyone who gets their hands on this game will have a great time. And for that reason, I'm gonna give Mario vs. Donkey Kong a 4 out of 4. Nintendo's victory lap continues, despite the recent news that the Switch 2 is going to be delayed to 2025. If you want to hear more about that and other gaming news, make sure to subscribe to me here to be updated every time I upload a new video or news short. I also have a TikTok linked below if you prefer it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace!